So I've got a big fat distribution problem. So I self-published this game, Colossi, a couple years ago, I guess at this point. Ran a Kickstarter for it. I've sold probably 550, 600 copies, and really proud of like where we've gotten to so far. But I also need to prove to myself that I can sell this game beyond just my friends and family, that I could get it into some stores and sell it at some sort of scale that goes beyond just like super indie tiny project, right? And it turns out that I've actually run into arguably the hardest problem of self-publishing. So distribution is really hard, and getting out in front of people, getting into stores, selling to strangers is quite difficult to do. I run into this all the time at work, where I work with a lot of software developers, and everyone always has a bunch of side projects that they're trying to kind of hustle out there. And there's this idea in their head that's like, maybe if I build this cool side project, I could get some passive income and a bunch of users and whatever. And you can get these huge dopamine hits really fast, because actually building an application that is like exactly to your specifications, because it's your little side project and it has no users, is actually pretty easy to do, and it's like fun to do, and it happens pretty fast. The problem is that distribution is much, much harder than that. Reaching people, finding an audience, getting people to talk about it, getting people to swipe their credit card for it is substantially harder than actually building the thing, right? I realized this. I was talking to this guy who's in the New York kind of board game world. He hosts a cool game testing event every week. Nice guy. He builds games to the point where they're ready to show to a publisher and then sells them. And when you do that, you make obviously significantly less money per copy, because you don't own the IP anymore, but you get some percentage of it. But they are responsible for putting it onto shelves, for marketing it, for finishing the art, and they have some level of creative control over it, depending on who that publisher was. And so for some game designers, that's a much more appealing thing, because they just get to do game design all year long and sell as many games as they can to publishers and let them handle this other part of it. And when he heard that I self-published, he kind of laughed and said, "Oh, I see. So you've reached like the final boss of self-publishing, which is distribution." I was like, I need to get onto shelf stores. I need to work with a distributor. I need to have somebody who has relationships with these different stores. And he's like, yeah, welcome to the hard part. Welcome to the reason that I don't self-publish. Okay, so what do I do about this? I've talked about this before. I went kind of like solo and self-published because I wanted to learn every part of this, partly to figure out, do I want to do this again? And it's been cool. I've learned about how manufacturing works. I've learned about working with artists and getting kind of what we want there, and doing every bit of writing on the game on my own was really cool, and having complete creative control was cool. Managing this inventory was great. Running the Kickstarter was really fun. And, I think we sold like 300 or something, 350 through the Kickstarter. Since then, I've sold to, friends and family. I've gotten it into a couple retail stores, like it's in the bookstore of my college, because they can put up kind of a special thing that's like, hey, this was created by an alumnus. And I'm in a few online retailers like Blue Knight and a couple others. So things are happening. Like there is some momentum, but there's a bunch of things that haven't worked, right? So for one, I have visited quite a few board game stores, and it has been an absolute dead end, because it's just not really how it works. They work with a number of distributors who generally aggregate a whole bunch of different publishers, or if the publisher's big enough, they might have a direct contact with the publisher. But when someone like me shows up and says, hey, I have one game and I wish you would show it, they're sitting there going like, hey, there's like 10,000 good board games out there, and we're not carrying most of them already. Like, how can we be confident that we're going to sell this thing that is really small and indie? And it's fair enough. It's a totally reasonable objection. And so I've gone to other board game stores where I have a little bit more of a local connection, right? I have something like my college bookstore, where they have a reason to say, hey, an alumnus made this game, that's why you should buy it. You have like an angle into it. I've gone to super local board game stores. I've gone to the one here in Astoria, where I live. I've gone to ones in my hometown who were really friendly, but they just said, it's really hard to put this on a shelf. We've taken local things before, we've taken indie things before, and people come in here and they want to buy Catan. They don't want to buy a local indie game. Which is disappointing, but I also understand it. Why would they take the financial risk on this if they don't think that they can sell it? So I've also tried, I made a video about this in the past. I went to my first conference recently, and I did manage to sell more games than I expected to. The thing is that it's extremely labor intensive. I was unbelievably exhausted at the end of it. Not to mention, it's like 3 days of my time. But then also afterwards, I was like, I need a week to recover. That was so exhausting. And I did sell a number of games, but like in terms of if you wanted to break it down by dollars per hour, it's not great. And so that's not really a sustainable solution. That's something I can continue to do to get the game out there, but it's not a great sustainable solution. So then I've talked to other distributors. I've talked to these distributors who already have a relationship with all of these board game stores. I reached out to a number of them that actually specialize in indie games. And the response that I got across the board, several of them were very friendly and were happy to email with me and kind of share information. But a lot of them said, we like to work with companies who have like 10 or 15 games. They talk about having like, you have a sell sheet, a kind of like a 1-page thing that's like, here's why my game is interesting. Here's the audience that it's for. Here's the type of game it is. Here's kind of where it fits on your shelf and how to think about it. And when a publisher comes to them with like 15 games and it's like, yeah, we have like a simple family game. We have this like little like light dice game. We have a bigger, more complicated, 4-player game, a hobbyist game, whatever. You have a wide range of stuff, different box sizes, different levels of complexity. It's a lot easier for them to sell that, to go to a board game store and say like, hey, what are the gaps in your supply right now? What do people want? And they can give them something that is, a little bit more specific, and then they can say, oh, cool, I have an array of games that might fit that. But pretty much all of them said, if you're an indie publisher who has one game that's finished, it's much, much harder for us to sell that. So I'm trying a new thing where I actually worked with this company most recently who specializes in filling the gap in the market where I am right now. And they have a consignment model. So basically, they play tested the game, they liked it, they said, send us 60 copies. We're not buying them, but if we manage to go sell them at board game stores, we split the revenue, which seems like a fair gamble. So the gamble was the cost of shipping those out there. And I guess if they don't sell them, I don't know if it'll even be worth the price of shipping them back to me, because it's like at that point, it's like, I don't know. So we'll see. But it's a gamble. And we'll see if somebody else who does this with indie games all the time and has a relationship with a bunch of board game stores is able to sell my game. And if they are, we'll ramp it up and I'll report back here on how it goes. The other last thing I was kind of thinking about, which like maybe this is crazy, but since we're in the spirit of self-publishing experimentation, I almost thought about like, what if I could just hire someone to call every board game store in America? I don't have time to do it. It's a lot of work. But like if I could find someone who's like high energy and young, I even thought about like my teenage nephew. I was like, what if they literally called every board game store in America? There's a couple thousand of them, I think. And just said, hey, we have an indie game. It's got good reviews. Will you do this? And I think they're going to get 99 out of 100 no's. But like if they got a few yeses, like how worth it would that be? I need to kind of crunch the numbers on it. But I thought that might be an interesting experiment too. I don't really have time to make the calls, but somebody else might. So anyway, I have a distribution problem. I've tried a bunch of stuff to fix it. And it's a really tricky position to be in. And we'll see how it goes. If you don't own the game, you can help me with my distribution problem by going to our website and buying the game yourself. And we'll send you a nice little package in the mail. Anyway, we'll see how it goes.